Ben, you idiot.
What the f, Charles? Hello, everybody. Welcome to Benny's Big Talk. My name is Ben Markham, and I'm here with my friend Charlie. Hello, Charlie.
How's it going, Benny?
It's going well. I'm tired. How are you feeling?
I'm really tired. Fridays for me are rough. So
Yeah. You want to talk about why? You want to get into your feelings real quick?
it's just the legal field. Fridays, there's a lot of deadlines. I learned today that there is actually a county in Florida in the Panhandle, Taylor County, and I just found out today that their entire county does not record any lawsuits or litigation online. So
it's all paper?
No, they just don't have it available online. So if you want to look up a case or do anything, you have to literally call this number and give them an email, and they will email it to you. Whereas like every other county has it available online. It's
an entire county.
Yep, the entire county. So,
local politics, man.
Yeah.
No, yeah. I encountered that a lot in engineering as well. Some counties are crazy. They're living in another century, that's for sure. But hey, you made it through. All right, here we are. It's the weekends. All right. Unless you guys are watching this and it's not the weekend, in which case, jelly. Little jelly. All right. Bro, here's what we're going to do tonight. For one, we're going to enjoy these Moscow mules. Cheers. What we're also going to do tonight is play a little game. All right. And in this game, we're gonna do a little debates. We're gonna do a little conversation. All right, a little dialectic, and we decided to let the topic be decided by the fates. All right, and what we end up discussing will be unknown to us, and we'll have to discuss whatever comes up in the cards. So
no preparation beforehand.
None at all, and this could be anything, absolutely anything. Something we know literally nothing about. Maybe our favorite topic ever. Unlikely. But we're going to let the cards decide for us. So, Charlie, would you like to outline any of the rules, or would you just like to start picking a card?
I mean, I don't really think there's any rules that we should follow here with this. I think it's just, how do we decide a winner,
Well,
or are we going to let everyone decide that?
Yes, it's going to be a poll. Absolutely.
Oh, we're going to do a poll.
Yes, democracy. We're going to let the people decide who won.
Interesting. So there's each one of these cards has 5 random topics.
Oh yeah, you can go ahead and pick one, And then remember, so we're going to do one veto. If we absolutely hate the topic, we have no interest in discussing it, then we can use our one veto on it. Want me to pick one?
Pick a card, Benny.
I hate this game. All right, let's go. Should I read it? Do you want to read it?
Well, there's 5 topics on each card, so.
You're the guest. Make your choice. What do we got?
Should women be allowed to play on men's sports teams?
Okay.
What do you think about that one, Benny? Should we veto that? Is that a little too topical at this moment?
Listen, I am not afraid to discuss that. I will leave that up to you.
Would you like me to run through the other 4 just to
Sure,
see?
let's do it.
All right. We also have, would the world be a better place without religion?
Okay.
Is money the root of all evil?
Mm-hmm.
Do we really need an age limit on drinking alcohol? Or should dueling to defend your honor be legalized?
I mean, that's just like a definite yes. So
I agree.
That
would be hard to
before
debate
it
that.
Started. Yeah.
It would be hard to debate that. But.
All right. So I think we've done a lot of religion on the show already. And so we'll stray away from that topic. And what was the third one? What was the one after religion?
Is money the root of all evil?
Okay. I think there's some topics to be had there. So I'm going to let you decide as the guest. I'm going to put that on your head between women and men's sports or money is the root of all evil.
¿Por qué no los dos?
Okay, dale, hagámoslo.
Sí.
Okay. ¿Qué tema quieres discutir conmigo?
No.
¿Nadie?
Mm-mm.
All right. Está bien. Okay, guys. We're going to do both topics, according to Charlie. All right, let's run it. So let's start with the less controversial topic. Ease people in. All right. We don't want to scare you guys with our straight white male opinions, such as they may be. So, is money the root of all evil? So, should we do like an opening arguments and then counter arguments kind of thing, rebuttal kind of like structure thing?
I think we should first start by establishing who's going for and who's going against it.
Right. It would be weird if we just both agreed that money was the root of all evil. So, you want to flip a coin, or do you have a particular bent on that topic already that you're leaning towards that you might be able to argue a little better?
I feel like I could argue that money is not the root of all evil.
Okay. All evil is a tough thing, but I will argue for it. Okay. So, should I begin?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Let's hear you.
All right. So, money is the root of all evil is a tough thing to argue for because, there are certainly other evils, evils that come from, pure hatred, from childhood traumas, other things that affect you. I mean, obviously, Hitler had more things in mind than just money, even though he did profiteer off of the Nazi regime. But, if people solely had money in mind, there'd be a lot of things that weren't done historically that were completely counter to the making of money and that were manifestly evil, things that were not particularly profitable, but very evil. But I would say that when you involve money in your personal life and in your professional life, it tends to affect the way your relationships end up, and often negatively. I found that when I involved money in my career playing music, when I made it my only income, I found that it stained it, and it stained every show I played, every interaction with everyone I worked with was always touched by that money, and everything that I did was for that because I needed it, and because I made decisions that were solely to keep me alive and to advance myself financially, when otherwise I would have made much better decisions. Maybe I would still be doing it if I did it for the passion or for the love of it, but instead I made decisions based on money because I had to. And I think that really soured a lot of it. And I also think of relationships with coworkers and in my jobs when there became an aspect of a difference in pay that we became aware of, and it soured my relationship with other coworkers, and it became an ugly thing because you get this aspect of jealousy, which is just unnatural, and it shouldn't be a thing that matters, but you get these animalistic, angry feelings, when you feel like you're being slighted with money and with friends. I hate the topic of money because it always it creates this awkward dynamic between people that I think is very unhealthy, and it leads to evil, absolutely. And money may not be everyone's vice, but the people who devote their lives to it, they lose track of so many other more important things in their life, like their family, their friends, their contributions to their community, to creativity and expression, all for the sake of just piling stacks of cash, and often at the detriment to the people around them, and it's just because they're obsessed with the chase of that money. And overall, I think that though we need money to survive, obviously, in our current economic system, I think that if you can do your best to not chase that money, completely and objectively without regard to the other beautiful things in life, then life would be better off if money wasn't the only goal. And that's why I would say money is the roots of at least most of the evils in the world today, especially as capitalistic as we are in the current global economy. It becomes an issue of money. Everything we do, including war, is all about money these days. And so I think it's an ugly thing that can lead to a worse, hollow, voided life that is just not in line with where I think you should be as people. So that's my opening statement.
Okay. Well, I think money, people, definitely a symbolic ball and chain of sorts in today's climate, just because, you need money to get anything and everything that you need.
Yeah.
You hear big topics about, the price of eggs or the price of groceries. And the key word there is the price, what you have to do. And if you look at money as far as work is concerned, like that's what a lot of people are uncomfortable with or unhappy with, is that they don't think that the work that they're performing is worth the value of the goods that they get in return. Because when you think about it, money is really just a way to keep track of work. It's not like it's a physical thing, but at the end of the day, the value of that thing is work. Like that's what you're doing. You don't get money unless you perform work in society. And so I think that if you look back to when before money was a thing, there were civilizations that bartered and traded in like actual goods, not just money and intrinsic value. And at that point, it was a little bit different of a way to value the work, because you could walk up into a market, in Istanbul with like your biggest pig from the farmland, and who knows the value of that pig, because the work that you put in to raise that pig, it's not like a specific device. You know what I'm saying? It was dependent on somebody's evaluation of that value, whereas money is a fixed rate of value. And yes, it fluctuates with the current economy and stuff, but as far as money being the root of all evil, I definitely feel like people are capable of not really worrying about the value if they let go of like physical things. And this kind of goes into a more, spiritual level of it. I know you said that this podcast, you've been doing a lot about religion, but the way you look at the world with money, like you can definitely be happy without having money. You can be unhappy without money as well, but I feel like it's a perspective.
I think so. I'm gathering points from what you're saying. That's, for one, that money is simply a measure of value, right? And you can't ascribe kind of moral meaning to it, because there's always going to be things of value traded in our world, and money is just an abstract way that we currently use to measure it, for the ease of trading and stuff. So you can't really apply morals to it, right? Because it's just a means of exchange. But I would say that's the connotations of that means of exchange are important, because I got a bit of that ginger in my throat, guys. It's getting a little spicy in there, man. A little spice. So, the meaning we apply to money and the chase of it is where I think the evil lies. The currency itself is, that's immaterial. It's especially immaterial these days because it's fake. It's completely determined by banks and Federal Reserve. And so it can be manipulated at will in order to change our economy in different directions and to influence people's behavior. And I think that it is so immaterial, but the the ways that people associate with money are constant. And it's because you associate money with your ability to provide, your ability to have a good life, and your ability to succeed and be above everyone else, which is something that is amplified when money becomes a factor. Because naturally, if say we were trading, goats and pigs and things like that, your main goal there is survival, subsistence, keeping your family alive. But when money becomes an abstraction, it's just a number. It's very easy for you just want that number to just increase, exponentially and indefinitely, and then that goal becomes a goal in and of itself, like almost like an addiction of chasing that money, and you'll do anything to chase that money, just chasing that number rising without regard to what is hurting in the rest of your life because of that abstraction. And honestly, the connection between your work and the value of money, like like Karl Marx explained in Das Kapital and his theory on labor, the power that you get out of your labor is not proportionate to the value of money and often lags behind it significantly. And it is very difficult for workers to really advocate for the value of their labor. And as inflation rates are skyrocketing, and so labor rates are continuously lagging behind the value of the money, and so you get this resentment, and you feel like you're of a lower class because the value of your work does not equate to the value of the money, which is constantly depreciating, and so it leads to this feeling of that you're unworthy. It leads to disagreements in the home, arguments over money, which are the worst kind of arguments. As a married man, you've probably experienced some arguments about money. They're not fun. They're the worst. I would do anything to avoid them, and because they feel dehumanizing. As soon as the money gets involved, it feels ugly, and it feels like all of your other emotions and feelings are just secondary to the money,
Right.
and that's why I hate it. I hate chasing money. That being said, I want money. I want a lot of money, and I like to spend money. But maybe that's my evil.
Well, I also think that some people misconstrue money, comparing it to the evil, the root of all evil, whereas money, the real issue is a sense of security. Because why do people chase money? Why do you want more money? You don't want to think about the problems associated with money. You don't want to have to worry about, how you're going to, get food for your family, or how you go on trips, to stay, mentally sane. But
That's a good point, because there's apparently, I don't remember the exact number. Obviously, it's going to change depending on your currency and where you live and stuff like that. But there is a certain income level where you reach a point of satisfaction and security, right? Where anything above that, like there's an extremely high diminishing rate of returns in terms of the satisfaction you get with money after a certain level, and it could be anywhere between like 80 grand a year to 200 grand a year depending on where you live. In U.S. dollars, by the way, we're in America, and so there's a max, a level where you hit that security, and you're like, things are good. I don't have to worry about money. I can go out to a nice restaurant if I want, as long as I budget for it. But we may not go out and buy a Rolls Royce, but it's like we're okay, and you don't have to think about money all the time, and that's the level of security, and that's a great place to be in, because I think that you should want to have just enough money to be comfortable. But like social media and all that shit just makes you want to covet the things that the rich and wealthy have that you don't, and that lifestyle, which is just unattainable and stupid and not real anyways. It's that allure of the wealth that draws you to do things, like buy shit you can't afford, and try and like portray a lifestyle that you don't have. And again, that's the evil of money drawing you in. It's an addiction. But if we didn't have that, if we didn't have the watching other people and their money and flaunting it, if we just, if we were living, in a medieval hamlet, and, all we had was a river and some crops and a farm, then all that would matter would be your family and whether you had enough food to last through the winter and that you had people who you loved and they were safe. And that should be all that matters. But now we have money.
Right. Well, you did bring up, social media, seeing it being exposed to what you don't have. One could argue, is money the root of that, or is that just an individual being, coveting what they don't have, like never being satisfied, always wanting more?
So I think jealousy, right?
Yeah,
Not
jealousy. Money. I think it's human nature to always want what you don't have by, down to, genetics, but kind of moving on a different point because, our topic was, is it the root of all evil? I also think that, money couldn't be the root of all evil because, as you see in, in criminal law, they call them crimes of passion. What happens if, you walk in on your wife and she is, sleeping and you catch her in bed with another man? I don't think you're thinking about how much money that guy has when you pull out,
maybe she was. That's
whatever
why she
you
got
have
in bed with him.
Well, I mean,
Yeah, them big bucks.
That's true, but
Maybe.
That's a good counter. That's a good counterpoint.
I bet if I offered you 6 figures right now, you'd get in bed with me right now, Charlie, wouldn't you?
That's
the evil right there.
The root. That's the root. That's the root of
That's
it.
the root.
We'll have to figure out those 6 figures. We can talk off air about that later. But
I'll get my wallet, get my checkbook. All right. So there are definitely other sources of evil. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that money is involved in all of them, though. Like I mentioned, like every internet argument always leads with a reference to the Nazis. Of course, it always goes there. But let's just go there. So there were many atrocities committed by the Nazis, right, in their 12 years in power. But central to all of that was profiteering and money. These men got very, very rich off of the torture and oppression that they put upon millions of people, and constantly through that was the desire to aggrandize themselves. Even at the end of World War II, when there were bombs were being dropped on Berlin and it was completely over, it was everything was done. Heinrich Himmler was trying to sell Jews, trying to sell their freedom in order to gain hundreds of thousands of Reichmarks and then get passage out of Germany. I've been watching World War II documentaries for like a week, by the way, so that's why I'm. It's just in my mind, but so that dude, even when he was threatened with death and lifetime in prison, hanging, he was still like, I'm gonna get a few bucks out of this, and selling people's lives for that, that's the level of profiteering. That some people go to, man, and when you have this abstraction of money, it's so dehumanizing that you would sell anything, just to make a buck. And some people are like that, and not everyone's like that, but a lot of people, especially in positions of power, which can be attained often through money, especially in our political system. It's all a money game, people buy elections. And so it's brutal. And I think money is definitely, it may not be the cause of every single evil thing people do, but I think that it's definitely involved in every evil thing that people do, And
somehow you think that with every, crime or, mishap, you can always find a way to connect it to money somehow. That's what you're saying?
I think money is on their mind. Unless they're literally insane, which is a thing that happens, then definitely money is definitely a factor in their decision making, I think. It may not be the main reason, because there are crimes of passion, as you mentioned, and you see those. And that's another, that's a moment of emotional fury that's quick, and that's why, it typically gets a lighter sentence than premeditated murder, because it's a flush of emotions. It's difficult for some people to control. So it's like, it's not a planned action, but it's like, that's, you're being overwhelmed by your emotions, and money does the same thing to you. Money gets people so flustered and scared. Imagine the feeling of being scared to look at your bank account. Just a really minor version of it. Especially in our middle class lifestyle. But It's imagine that feeling amplified. Imagine the hunger and the pain. People have no money, and what it'll drive people to do, man. Poor people, poor people are sometimes driven to crime and terrible things in life because they are trying anything they can do to get ahead. So it is definitely a cause for suffering amongst people who don't have it. And I think there's a lot of evil there, man. I don't know.
And, not to segue from my side, but you did bring up a good point that I feel like people do those crimes when it's money. And I think that's an issue with, the needs, the basic needs that you need to survive. Because money, we're getting to the point where it's like, should you need money to get those basic needs? Should a shelter and food be naturally provided for you, like basic? I mean, we're not talking like
universal basic income.
Yeah, I mean, we're not talking like a 12-ounce sirloin steak, but like what if everybody is entitled to like a cup of rice a day?
I think they can get a sirloin as long as it's not a ribeye, man. I mean, they can get a sirloin. Sirloin is like subsistence, bro. Like, I wouldn't eat a sirloin unless I was starving, dude.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just my middle class perspective, but like sirloin's tough. It ain't tender.
Not if it's done right. Not if it's done right.
It's hard to do it right, bro. I'll put it in a stir fry.
It is, but it's worth it. It's worth it.
You use sirloin, man?
Well, I mean, I just had a sirloin the other day.
By choice?
Yeah, I made it.
Oh, all right. Props. Turned out good?
I mean, granted, it was a money thing, because the ribeye was $30 and the sirloin was,
the root of all evil,
$12. But there was no evil there. That was just a choice.
Sirloin is evil.
The sirloin is the root of all evil.
Money drew you to an inferior steak experience, all right? That is the evil that I'm talking about, everyone. Grandstanding. I rest my case.
I abstain.
I'm hungry.
You're hungry? You don't want to do this you don't want to do this next topic.
No, you don't want to do this next topic. That's why you just said you don't want to do this next topic, but I'm ready for this topic.
Interesting.
Yeah?
Should women be allowed to play on men's sport teams?
So, I want to clarify.
I don't want you to clarify because I know where you're going to go with this, and I think we can go there.
Okay, but we have to go there. Because that is the discussion.
That is the discussion.
Yeah.
That is. And I think it's a worthy discussion because it's topical right now.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm willing and able if you are.
Let's discuss, should women be allowed in men's sports? And okay, so let's decide our opinions on this. All right. What would you like to be your opinion?
I think I will take the women should be allowed to play in men's sports.
Yeah?
But there's an asterisk to it. But I'll get there with that.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Oh, no. You're going to get to the asterisk? Okay, well, I guess I will take the opinion of women should not be allowed to play in men's sports. All right? Are we talking about vice versa, too, or literally just women in men's sports?
I think it should be limited to women in men's sports.
Okay. So...
unless you want to go there.
Let's discuss that asterisk, Charlie.
Okay. My asterisk is with this, and I've actually thought of this because I've been trying to find a solution to this because I am a sports guy. I like watching sports. And I also acknowledge that women's sports does not have the viewership that the men's sports do. And naturally, you're going to want to, when you're watching a sport, you're going to want to watch the most athletic you can, like the highest tier class. Very rarely will you, and obviously there's, differences in opinion on this, but most of the time, you're going to want to watch the best performers that you can. You're not going to want to, pay to watch lesser talent or lesser athletic ability. That that being said, a lot of sports require a level of physicalness or athleticism that requires a bit of strength, and it's just it's a biological fact that, males have more muscular mass on average than women do, and so that there's, a strength deficiency. My thought to solve this issue and to allow women to play in men's sports is looking at the UFC and how the UFC is organized. So in the UFC, they have a bunch of different weight classes. They have featherweight, lightweight, heavyweight, bantamweight, all these different weight classes, and you have to fit in this weight class. So my thought was, what if we organized all sports like that, and we just had weight classes like where, let's just, for example, for the argument's sake, you have a, featherweight class, 110 pounds to 130 pounds or 120 pounds. And you have to fit in that. And you have a whole league dedicated to that. So let's say for this hypothetical scenario, we'll do the NFL, because obviously that's probably one of the hardest sports to get like women involved in. Because obviously there isn't really a successful women's tackle football league like there are for other sports. There's a women's NBA.
You have to tell me, Charlie. A disclaimer to everyone, I'm not a sports guy, so that is not a perspective I'll be coming at this discussion from, but please enlighten me. So there is not a big mainstream women's equivalents to the NFL?
Right, where they put on pads and helmets and tackle. Right now they have minor leagues where they have flag football. So they do the flags, they don't wear the padding.
Yeah.
And women can play football that way.
But there's no tackling in that because they're just grabbing a flag instead?
Right.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So my thought was, what if you broke it down into separate leagues, and soccer, or the world football, the actual football per the world, they have multiple different leagues. Like, Britain has their own league. Spain has their own league. They're like Germany has their own league. So you can definitely have all of these successful leagues and split it up.
Mm-hmm.
That's proven it. And like players will go there, play in whatever league, move, transfer leagues, and they play games inter-leagues at times.
Yeah.
So my thought was, why can't we find a way, and I'm sure there's, things that I'm not thinking about, but what if we broke it down by weight class, and so that male or female, you have to weigh this specific amount, and people will come and say, well, that defeats the purpose, because, a 120-pound male and a 120-pound female, based on what you're telling me with, genetics, majority of the males will be stronger. So my theory is bump up the female weight and have males of lesser weight playing with females of a heavier weight.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, this is all hypothetical. I've been thinking about this lately because I do want to try to solve this issue of like,
you're looking for a solution, and I think that's great, and you have to try and solve this because it has been in the public eye a lot lately. But of course, it's been more in the public eye because of the transgender community and how that relates to the traditional separation of men's and women's sports. So I can't look at it from a sports perspective because I don't follow a lot of sports. But I will say that, so it is a competition. The goal is to find not to say the strongest, but the best in that discipline, right? Based on an equal set of factors, equal playing field. So that's when you have two people competing or a whole team full of people competing, you're just deciding the best of those people, not based on any physical differences, advantages, disadvantages they have. You're deciding based on their skill, training, and aptitude, with a control being their physical size, right? And so typically that control is done with weight classes. And as you mentioned, pound for pounds, men and women do differ even in the same weights. For one, the bell curve of their weights is going to be dramatically different. So even though there are women that exist that are bigger, stronger, and more powerful than many men, right? So there is an overlap in those curves, but generally there will be more women on a lighter weight scale and more men on a higher weight scale. And even when they overlap, there is going to be a difference in their physical performance capabilities, even at the same weight. And you know this because the military has been doing testing on this for many years. And in the military, there's also physical demands, right? And there are high stakes, right? So they need people to be in peak physical condition. They need them to be able to work together as a team. And the stakes are very high because they're life and death. So they test this stuff very, very rigorously. And also being a volunteer military in the United States, we're talking about, they have a great need to get as many people as they can. They need as many people as they can. There's a dearth of recruiting. And so they're not trying to turn people away or limit their recruitment options based on sexism or some ridiculous idea like that. They need as many people as they can, especially in combat units. But they've been testing this for many years. And what they found is that when they tried to incorporate women into combat units, they found that although absolutely an equal footing with men in terms of alertness, mental ability, acuity, and in a lot of ways stamina, they could not match the physical power of the men they're with, and it became a tactical kind of liability. Yeah. And so when it comes down to a unit having to work as a team, every member of that unit, it's not about their feelings or their identification. It's about whether they can work in a unit. It's dehumanizing, but that's because it has to be in order to work well as a functional unit. Every piece has to be able to contribute to exactly the same way. So there has to be an even playing field there. And what they found is that incorporating women, even of the same weight and the same training, the same technical abilities, they could not keep the integrity of that unit. There was a liability there. There was a weakness. And so they haven't, in wide scale, incorporated women into combat roles because it technically was not effective. And it's not anything against the incredibly strong, powerful, and intelligent women who want to join the military and perform these combat roles. Obviously, they exist. It's ridiculous to say they don't, but if you look at it from the perspective of fairness over a wide margin of people, we have to acknowledge that there is a difference, and it's not a bad difference. It's functional specialization. I mean, biologically and historically, men were designed to perform a different function than women were. And now that we have sports, we can look at it both. We're looking at solely performance-oriented people, highly trained, highly physical people who are trying to perform at the top of their disciplines in a physical and mental way. And so the fairness in judging them has to be a paramount thing. And I think that the integrity of the game should be paramount over individual feelings of identity. And we all have our struggles with identity. It's absolutely important, but the integrity of the game has to be paramount. And I don't think you can reconcile, any one person wanting to perform in any league, any capacity that they choose, while also keeping the integrity of the game. Because if you lose the integrity of the game, then everyone's experience is now lesser for it because they don't feel like their performance is being judged fairly. And then it loses all meaning as a competitive endeavor.
Well, in certain sports, I think they fight that by setting, a cap space. So you have a certain amount of money as a team owner that you can pay all of your players. Mm-hmm. And so naturally, if you're a higher level player, like if you have, better abilities, you're going to demand more money. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of caps it by allowing, it keeps a team from just getting all of the best players because they can't pay them unless those players take a pay cut, which the players aren't going to want to do because unless, It's specifically trying to form the dream team to make a team that can't lose in a
It's the
championship.
same as your fantasy football league. You've got a limited budget, and a limited choice, and you have to make the best set of players with your limited options.
That's right.
Right.
And so as you were saying it, you mentioned it's would be difficult to keep the integrity of the game by adding females to allow them to play in team sports. I feel like a counter to that
Not in team sports, but in a men's league, or at least a combined unisex league of sports. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Well, once one single female joins the league, it will officially be a co-ed league.
Yeah.
It can't be just one or the other. And what I was thinking while you were bringing up those points was that instead of the weight class, maybe you just require teams to have a certain amount of female players to kind of counteract the integrity aspect of it, where it's like you're trying to formulate the best team, but the way to fight that is to make it even across the board. So naturally, you would say, going back to our football, but in the NFL, you have to have 55 players on the roster, and that's the cap. You can't have any more or less on the roster for a game. And so what if they changed it so that the NFL changed the rules to require each team to have 45 male players and 10 female players?
It's a diversity quota in a sense. Well, doesn't that kind of imply that there's a distinct disadvantage, almost a handicap, to having female players in your team, and then forcing everyone to comply to it, kind of give a negative connotation to the inclusion of female players in that team?
Well, I think that's a different argument entirely, an issue entirely, because yes, if you took a team that had 55 male players and then you took a team that had 45 male players and 10 female players, obviously the 55 male player team would have the upper hand. They wouldn't necessarily win, but they would have an advantage based on, size and strength of those players. So
it is a disadvantage, you admit, to add female players to a team, you would say. Regardless of how you'd feel about it, whether they have the right to, you would say it is, by and large, it would be a technical disadvantage if they were forced to include female players.
I think if it was unanimous across the board, it wouldn't be noticeable. Because if you change the way that the leagues were organized and kind of made every single league co-ed.
To make it equitable.
Or inclusive. And that kind of, that's where the biggest issue comes down to is their inclusion, is that inclusion worth it?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what we have to look at is really just why. So, I mean, are we implying that there's something wrong with having a separate female league? Why would that be a wrong thing that we have to correct? I mean, I feel like that is a great way for both genders to have representation and to have a league of their own, to have a place where they can have an even keel of performance and where everyone can be happy. So what is the problem with having separate female and male leagues, and why do we have to fix that?
Well, I think the issue comes down to, and I hate to say it because it fucking brings up our last point of money. It comes down to money, because the female sports, they don't get paid as much. And why do they not get paid as much? Viewership. It's it goes back to my initial point of, if you're going to want to watch an event, you're going to want to watch the best. You're not going to want to. A majority of people aren't going to want to watch a league where they know it's a lesser form than the alternate form.
You think they're just assuming that it's going to be a lesser form just because it's women, performing in it as opposed to men, and so they have a sexist bias there, which is why they make less money in the viewership for those sports?
And I won't even go on the limb and say that there's any less excitement or any less talent, because, like you said, in an all-women's league, it's unanimous, so the talent pool is generally the same. Obviously, there's going to be little fluctuations in talent,
and they
here and
fight
there.
just as hard and just as viciously.
One could argue that the female sports go harder than the male sports because they have more to prove. trying to gain more. In female soccer versus male soccer, I've watched both sports, and the male soccer is just embarrassing because the men just like, they will grab their ankle and they'll whine, oh, get me out of here. Oh. And then you watch the Women's World Cup with these ladies, and they're getting like metal cleats into their ankle, and they'll hop back up, and there's hair pulling, head butting.
Yeah, they're badass, man. In the UFC, like you mentioned, watching women fight in the UFC is fucking incredible, man. And the power and the ferocity. I mean, like every bit as entertaining as when the men do it. But like you say, it is true and it's verifiable that there is a difference in the viewership between women's leagues and men's, and that is, and why that happens. There's a lot of factors at play there. Why people generally prefer to watch men's sports. I'm not gonna say that's a blanket statement, but it generally tends to be that way. But the result is that female athletes do often get paid less because their sports have less viewership. There's less money, less advertising money. So you think that's the main drive to combine men and women's sports as some kind of equity, because women feel like the viewership is just not equivalent to the value of what they're doing, and they think that no one's watching what they do. I mean, I think that's the main driver.
I think it is more likely that, I think at this point, it's more likely that your average Joe who watches sports, your average, person would watch a co-ed league with all the best male players and all the best female players, other than watching an all-female league. And I think that's just
because of familiarity. Just because it's more of what they're used to.
Right. Well, I think there's like a stigma that it's like, and I'm only going for the stereotypical, macho man, where it's like, oh, I'm not going to watch women's sports, I'm going to watch the men's sports, But yeah, so I think the only way to get it,
well,
and that
wait, Charlie, do you watch women's sports?
I watch women's soccer.
Yeah.
I watch the Women's World Cup. I don't watch any women's basketball. I don't watch any basketball except for March Madness.
Okay, well, yeah. So you do, yeah.
So I watched a little bit. I definitely watch. As far as sports go, the reason why I was focusing on the NFL is because that's the main sport that I watch.
Yeah.
I occasionally watch hockey, a little bit of baseball here and there. But like, I'm not going on the TV and like looking up the schedule for a, women's, baseball league.
You wouldn't seek it out.
I'm not
you would
seeking
watch
it out.
Yeah. There's no reason why you wouldn't watch it though.
Yeah. Like there's no, like if I'm channel surfing and there's a good game on, I might leave it on.
Yeah.
But I think, it's definitely there, the stereotype, and it's hard to fix those. It's hard to fix that.
But do you think that it is a stereotype, or do you think that there is some value of keeping those leagues separate? Do you think that any kind of division or stratification based on gender is inherently immoral and wrong and sexist? I mean, shouldn't there be some things that are left separate because we are biologically fundamentally different sides of a species, and there's beautiful, great things about that?
I don't think there's any actual issue with the separation. I'm mainly focusing on the issue of the equal pay opportunities.
Yeah.
I don't see that in this current...
Wait, Charlie, so what you're saying is that money is the root of all evil?
I'm not saying that, Benny. I'm
Sounds
not
like
saying
you're
that
saying
at
that.
all. I'm not saying that.
I rest my case once more.
But yeah, it's just, and there's no real way to solve it. Or I don't think that any of the major sports, none of the major sports have had enough experimentation to see what kind of effects that would have. Because there's no saying, going back to my, taking an NFL team and doing 45 players, 45 men and 10 women. there's no saying that those 10 women are going to be paid the same dollar amount as the men.
Yeah.
So until we do that and solve that.
Well, the pay gap between men and women is also another topic. It's definitely a multivariate issue, and so it's definitely going to apply to the sports world as well, and it applies to every industry. There is absolutely a pay gap between men and women in the market today. Personally, I think that there's more factors to that than just pure sexism. There's definitely some real market factors to that, and there's some differences in how in the average of how men and women work and how the market values their work, for better or for worse. And that, of course, is going to, you can extrapolate that to the high level sports arena as well. Those factors are still at play there. But as far as money being the general factor, I would say I see the drive for women to want to participate in a league that has much higher viewership, because you want to be, if you're in the top of your league, if you're the best of your league, but you're still always getting less viewership, less attention for your hard efforts and for the great work and the incredible prowess that you have, I understand there's absolutely, something that feels unjust about that. But there's always going to be things that there are limitations in your life that you feel. I have my own limitations. You have your own limitations. Everyone has. And in some ways, you're kind of raging against a machine that won't change. The market is going to perform the way it does for the reasons that it does and for natural forces that are at play there. Can you really change the viewership of men and women's sports naturally by trying to enforce certain inclusion? It's probably not going to work the way you want it to, because that market force is a natural force. People watch what they want to watch, and especially when you're going with the lowest common denominator of the largest amount of people possible, they're going to behave in a very in a way that is predictable, and it's going to be largely similar to the way it is now, and the reason why things are valued higher over other things. You know what I'm saying? So, I fumbled that a bit. Basically, if people watch a certain thing more than another thing now, if you change that thing, it's going to be proportionally different. And you can't force the markets to align with your ideas of morality, because it's not above those morals. It's disaffected by those morals.
We've seen it happen.
Yeah.
We've already seen it happen.
Name an example.
Bud Light.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The
market speaks.
It speaks.
Mm-hmm.
But, and I agree that that's why it's such a polarizing topic right now. I feel like what we're discussing and the, political discussion that's currently going on is a little bit different, because that's kind of a flip. You're talking about with the transgender issue? Yes.
Yeah.
In the women's sports.
Yeah.
And I don't really want to get into that, just because, that's a little too polarizing and political right now. But that doesn't mean anything, Benny. Don't read into that.
No, it's all right. It's all right. I understand. I think that we won't get into it, but I would say that the same arguments apply, that you can't force a market to do what you want it to, and you can't force physicality and force bodies to do what you want them to. They have certain properties, and there are differences in those properties, and sometimes there are things that you just can't change, no matter how hard you try, and we try and have equity where we can, and we try and make things fair where we can, because that's important in competition in sports. But there is never, ever going to be complete equity in the world, and we just have to accept that and move on to the best of our ability and have the best games we can with regard to that. So that's the end of my case.
I guess I still stand by, I would like to see women.
Yeah.
If they
see
can.
Some women?
Yeah. Make that a bit.
All right, bro. Me too.
No.
All right.
I want to see a world where it can be co-ed sports.
Yeah.
with equal pay, it's just hard to get there
Mm-hmm.
because obviously, as I go back to my previous statement, the money is based on the work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Funny how our two arguments are interconnected. I don't know how that happened.
it's
but it
almost
did.
like money's the root of all evil.
Almost like it is. Wow. I think that should tell you folks how to vote for the first debate. But listen, Charlie, I think so. Most people will not know this, but this is actually a very momentous occasion that Charlie's on my podcast. I used to hate this guy many years ago for completely irrational reasons, but many of my feelings are rational. I will admit that. But to go full circle in life, to now have you on my podcast, I think is a very special thing, and I certainly never would have thought that it would end up this way. But I'm glad it did. I'm glad to have you here.
Agreed. It's I would not have 15 years ago, looking back, if I would have asked myself, hey, are you going to be in Ben Markham's home doing a podcast? Like, can you believe that? And I
Not me.
wouldn't have guessed it.
Who would have
But
thought?
who would have thunk? Who would have thunk?
But here we are, man.
And here we are.
Here.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a
Thank you.
real pleasure.
Thank you for coming, Charlie. It's been great, and I think we learned a lot. We cried a little, we yelled a little, but I think this we came to some common ground, and that's the goal of things, man. It's discussion. But hey, it's been wonderful, and maybe if we have a little bit of time, we'll do a jam, but we'll see. We're very hungry, as we've established. We're gonna go eat some sausages here in a minute.
Do svidania.
Jabba sluplu.
Mm.
Charlie, thank you, my man.
Been a pleasure, Benny.
This has been Benny's Big Talk. Thank you, guys. Good night.